Hi, my name's Dan, and this video is one in a series of videos I'm doing about classes and races in video games, which is part of a larger series of videos, well, collection of videos that I'm doing on game design. And in this one, I'm just going to run through some classic fantasy races. So all of this video, firstly, I'm going to try and keep it quite short. And pretty much everything I say here should be actually common knowledge anyway. So it's just doing a quick run through of what might be considered the classic races. I hope I haven't missed anything out that you think is obvious. Here we go. So the first thing to note is that all these races seem to be bipeds. I don't know why it is that fantasy races have that built-in similarity to humans, but they do. Right, here we go. First, human. I think we kind of know what humans are, or maybe philosophy will decide for us eventually. At some point, is what we are. Apart from Zog from the planet Og. Hi, Zog, if you're watching. Um, what is there to say about humans? Often they're a generalist race in games and in fantasy settings. There's this idea that humans are kind of the midpoint on the graph, as it were. Um, Often they're also the dominant race in fantasy worlds, and I kind of want to ask, why is that the case? I'd be interested in seeing fantasy settings where humans are a minority. It might be an interesting route to go down. Okay, so into the I'm going to say the non-existent ones. Some people might argue with this, but that's fine. So elves. So the classic idea of an elf that we get is from the Lord of the Rings kind of setting, and generally, if you're doing an RPG style game, this is what you'll encounter in terms of elves. It's hard to have a fantasy game without elves. It can be done. There is another tradition of elves, which is the Santa's elves or the elves and the shoemaker type thing. And sometimes they do make it through to video games, but they're usually not RPGs. So elves' characteristics, they tend to be somewhat artistic, mysterious, wise and aloof. And the source of the ideas for elves strongly comes from Tolkien. Um, so from The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. So next, dwarves. Here's a picture of some dwarves. These particular dwarves seem to have guns, which is quite interesting. So characteristics of dwarves, short. It's kind of pretty much given that dwarves are shorter than humans. Hairy. So this is definitely a characteristic that seems to be prevalent in lots of different fantasy settings. Aggressive. Some settings more so and some less so. And mining seems to be a big thing. This idea that dwarves love to mine and they love gold particularly, and that in some settings they definitely live underground in their caves and their mines. Classic sources of the the way we think about dwarves, Tolkien obviously, but also Narnia, Snow White. Um, Obviously, there were 7 dwarves, and not all of them were hairy. Um, and the Discworld, one of my favourite sets of books. All right, moving on. Halflings, sometimes called hobbits. And here's a picture of playable halfling characters from Baldur's Gate game. So characteristics of halflings, they tend to be loyal, they tend to be roguelike, more sneaky, although not sneaky necessarily in the underhand kind of way, in the physical kind of way. They're potentially the kind of same size or height as dwarves, although they might be a bit bigger. But their dwarves are stockier and much less able to do stealth than halflings are. and particularly through from the Tolkien tradition, comfort loving. Um, they like their second breakfast and their pipe of smoke and things like that. Very much the source of the idea of halflings is the Tolkien uh, world. Um, I I've seen halflings in quite a lot of games, and maybe partly that's because it was picked up by Dungeons and Dragons in particular as a race to play. So they have found their way through into a lot of games. I haven't come across them a lot in like written fantasy settings. I don't think other than Tolkien. Um, okay, so there are potentially a few others. I'm going to quickly run through a few of the classics. So there's goblins, and there's trolls, and there's giants, and then the last big class that I want to mention, anthropomorphic animals. So there's not particularly, yeah, maybe there are, one or two that are real classics here, but this idea of taking an animal and turning it into a humanoid kind of race is it's not a classic fantasy thing in the same sense, but it is quite a common thing for video games to do and for some written fantasy settings. So I've just got a few examples here that I want to click through to give you some visuals. So that's a quick run through of some classic fantasy races, and that's it from me for now.